Good afternoon and welcome to this seminar on regulatory sandboxes. Energy transitions, as you know, relies on disruption, technologies, and sustainable solutions to achieve the decarbonization objectives. In this scenario, it is evident that regulation will play a relevant role. However, regulation needs to consider innovation, despite that regulation cannot always move as fast as innovation. To answer to this question, there is a growing interest across Europe in new regulatory mechanisms and tools fostering innovation, and about all they are going to talk this afternoon. A seminar that takes part of an European project, a Transnet project, who is coordinated by George Cisis, that is the coordinator and by rector of Toulouse, Paul Sabatier. And he will address us welcome words and explain something additional and more details about the project. George, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joan. Good afternoon, all of you. Welcome to this workshop on energy transition and energy regulatory sandboxes. As Joan told you, I am the coordinator with Marie-Pierre Glaise, another colleague from Toulouse University, of this important CIDOE Interreg program founded by European Union. What is the Transnet project? Well, the aim of our project is to create a university living lab, which is something that is very, very interesting for promoting innovation. In principle, living labs are existing. They are used by companies, by consultants, and they produce very interesting results. It is absolutely not our objective to replicate this type of models. We consider that university campus today are the right place for making demonstration of innovation. University campus, they can be seen as small smart cities with all necessary equipments, networks, and all that you need in order to advance innovation. And our idea in this project is to develop this university or academic living lab model that we want to make it transferable to outside of our universities. And of course, living labs can cover many, many domains. We try to make our demonstration, and we focus our work in the domain of energy and ecological transition, which is both of them very important subjects for our societies today. How we do that? In order to achieve this ambitious objective, we cluster a number of partners. We have today in our consortium 5 universities. I look my notes in order to not forget someone. Toulouse III University in France, the University Polytechnic University in Madrid. We have CIRCE, and also the University of Science of Lisbon and the University of Beira Interior in Portugal. And we have also 3 foundations: CIRCE, Funseam, and CTA from Andalusia. Well, I don't want to say much more. It is time to continue the program with some presentations about the very interesting subject of regulatory sandboxes for energy. Thank you very much again to be present in this workshop, and thank you the organizers for all the nice work done here. Thank you.
Thank you, George, for your coming words. Previously, my first words, I was just saying that there is a growing interest across Europe in new regulatory mechanisms and tools to foster innovation. In these regards, we consider that experimentation enables real-life testing of new products new services, or new business models associated with the energy transition. By allowing temporary removal of regulatory barriers, perhaps one of the most relevant barriers when promoting. Today, we are going to talk about energy regulatory sandboxes, and we have with us as a keynote speaker, Professor Meus. Professor Meus Leonardo is a strategy professor at the Blerick Business School in Brussels, Belgium, and director of the Blerick Energy Research Center. He's also professor at the European University Institute in Florence, where he is the deputy director of the Florence School of Regulation in the Robert Schuman Center for Advanced Studies, an institution that is a reference in Europe in the development of new regulatory approaches in the energy sector. His research has been focused on energy systems and markets and the role, especially a role of regulatory experimentation. Just in this field, considering the topic that we are going to discuss in this seminar, we will share with us his view of this new tool in energy regulation, the energy regulatory sandboxes. Thank you, Leonardo. For us, it's a pleasure to come with your participation. And without more delay, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and it's nice to see that you are starting a big new project where maybe you can take further some of the topics we have been discussing in our research and maybe develop on that. And I'm looking forward to the results of your project. Okay, I have a few slides that I'm happy to share with you. As you can see, I prepared a presentation, but of course I'm also available for a Q&A after the presentation. And my presentation is actually based on 3 steps in our research. Because on the left you see a white paper that we published around 2019, if I remember well, on the future of DSOs. And at that time we had organized a workshop with DSOs from different European countries, and we had also invited regulators in that workshop. And we looked at energy communities as a topic and also at regulatory sandboxes, which were 2 separate topics, but at that time, and I think still today, these 2 topics are somewhat connected. And we were lucky that in that workshop, we, for instance, had the Dutch regulator present at that time, who shared a lot of information about these still relatively new concepts of regulatory sandboxes. So that was, for me, also the first time I got to know the topic. And then later on, the publication you see there in the middle, it was a collaboration between several colleagues at the Florence School of Regulation with colleagues from the Copenhagen Business School, and we published then together our findings. And in that paper in the middle, we also already considered the fact that the countries that were quite early with this kind of regulatory experimentation had already gone through an evaluation and a change in their approach to regulatory experimentation. And that's what we did in that second publication. The third one is even more recent. It's just finished, where we also are part of a European consortium called EU Universal. And in that consortium, there is one deliverable just published where we discuss what I call the second wave of regulatory sandboxes, because initially there were just a few countries in Europe that had legislation that allowed regulatory sandboxes, but I've been really surprised of how many countries have followed the examples of those early movers and how much innovation there is going on in each country to see how to implement a regulatory sandbox. So I've also organized my presentation in these 3 steps, which is a bit the history of how I got to know this topic. And I'll be happy to talk you through. So as I said, in my understanding, there have been a few pioneers, and the 2 I think of are mainly Great Britain, the UK, and the Netherlands. Netherlands already in 2015 started with something they actually called, they didn't call it regulatory sandboxes. I speak Dutch, I'm from Belgium, but I'm Dutch speaking, so they call it their experiment law. So they were not using the terminology of sandbox, but if you look at what they did under that experiment law, basically it is what I would call a sandbox. Maybe a sandbox is also not fully defined, so maybe that's also why sometimes we have different understandings. But for me, the essence of a sandbox is that innovators can come to an authority and say, look, we have a really important innovation here, but this innovation is not allowed under the current rules. And we think that maybe you need to change the rules. But we understand that to change the rules for everybody takes time, and maybe regulators also are not so sure and need to be convinced that they have to change the rules for everyone. So the idea of the sandbox is that the innovator convinces the authorities that while they're thinking of changing the rules for everyone, they could already grant a derogation, so an exception to that one specific project where the authorities are convinced that they deserve an exception, because by giving that exception, we will learn something, and maybe the learning is that we don't want to do it again, or the learning is that everybody should be able to do this kind of innovation, and then we adapt the rules. Then in the Netherlands, as you can see in this table, the scope of what kind of exceptions you could ask to the rules. So the scope of the derogations was actually predefined. There was like a menu, a few articles of the energy legislation were suggested as areas where project promoters could ask an exception. It was also said that the default of the length of such a derogation would be 10 years, but open also for discussion. Then they had a clear choice, right? They were targeting these communities and homeowner associations that typically wanted to do things together, like sharing energy, and at that time that was not yet possible under the general rules in the Netherlands. Also interesting, I think, is who administers, who manages the sandbox. The case of the Netherlands was the ministry. I've never had the pleasure to talk to someone from the ministry to know how they experienced managing such a sandbox. I only know from the regulator. That regulators often, if the ministry manages it, regulators are often asked for advice. But then once a decision has been taken, if the ministry decides to give an exception to a certain project, then typically the regulator has a role in monitoring and following up, right? That they are doing what they were, allowed to do, but not more than that, right? So it's always, the derogation is always limited, so there is a need for some monitoring. And then I thought it was quite interesting to see that the UK has a quite different approach. So even though they started around the same time, they clearly made a choice that there is no menu of exemptions you can ask. You can ask whatever you want. It doesn't mean that you will get it, but at least it has not been predefined. Now, of course, that meant that people were asking a lot, which was completely not possible. So I don't know which approach is the best. The Dutch regulator told me that if you predefine, at least that was their initial experience, that they would, I don't know, let's say they gave an option of 8 articles you could ask an exemption for, and then the tendency of all the promoters was to simply ask for everything. I mean, if you give them a menu, they will just ask for everything and see if they can get everything. So maybe if you do not predefine it, it suggests that promoters might think more what they really need instead of just asking everything they need. Also, if you do not predefine it, one argument to not predefine it is that if as a regulator, you want to learn which parts of the regulation are obstacles to innovation. Well, if you already predefine it, you sort of assume that you know which elements of regulation need to change, right? While maybe that's exactly the point of a regulatory sandbox, that you might not know. So if you do not predefine, you might learn more, right? So I'm not saying I think one is better than the other, but you feel the difference. That's mainly what I want to bring across. Also, the experience in Great Britain, by the fact that they only allowed for 2 years was that many innovators complained that that was really too short. Why? Because often they needed to go in steps. First, they needed to get the approval of the sandbox, and then they still had to often get their financing organized. Now, imagine you have a 2-year derogation, but you need a year or more to get the financing of your project. By the time you're allowed to start, you already are at the end almost of your period. And then many of them could ask for an extension, but I guess that extension then also created again a bit of uncertainty for some of these projects. If you look at who could apply in GB, it's very similar to the Netherlands, maybe a bit more open by just also in general allowing companies to come forward. And very different from the Netherlands, there it was really the regulator being in charge of administrating, managing the sandbox. But then the regulator was often a go-between, right? So the regulator was the contact point, but the ultimate decision maker that would be able to say, yes, you can give that exemption, was then the authorities responsible for that legislation or for that code. So it often meant that the regulator, could not directly decide anyway, but had to sort of interfere and go back and forth. So again, you see there are pros and cons of the two possible approaches. Now, then, as I said, in that more recent publication we took stock of what happened in the meantime. So we looked, and that was for 2020, where they are. So meanwhile, we are already 1.5 years later, so maybe these models evolved again. But in 2020, what we noticed is that the GB continued to just have an open call, right? You could ask for any exemption you wanted. You could at least try. In the Netherlands, they increased the menu. So I do not know if people still just apply to get the whole menu or if they now think more closely about what they need. The length of derogation didn't change. But in the Netherlands, as you can see, the scope of who can apply has been significantly broadened. DSOs, who were not allowed to ask for exemptions, now can. And DSOs often use this as an opportunity to test new type of dynamic network tariffs in the Netherlands. And they also asked for it, right, to be eligible to propose projects. And then again, on administration, no huge change. So the Netherlands continues to work mainly with the ministry. GB with the regulator, but as you can see, I've added there that they also are now coordinating with these industry code administrators, which is something very specific to GB. They have things like the balancing code, and it turned out that some project promoters were asking exemptions to that code, and then they said, why not also introduce a regulatory sandbox for those codes, and then coordinate between these different initiatives of, instead of having 2 sandboxes organized by 2 different authorities, it could be better to have just one. So that's how they evolved. Also very interesting is, I think, this publication by Ofgem, where they themselves reflected on their experience so far. And there are several insights in there. And one I wanted to highlight, because meanwhile, I've learned from other regulators that they have a very similar experience. So it turns out that innovators often say, we need all kind of exemptions. What we want to do is not possible under the current rules. But sometimes it's because they don't know all the rules or have misunderstood it. So turns out that if you organize a sandbox, a lot of what regulators do is actually to explain the rules to innovators. And if you think about it, if you're involved in research, maybe this is not a full surprise, because you have a lot of innovators that have a more technical background, right? And they are not always into the latest regulatory developments, right? So maybe this is also not a surprise, but it means as a regulator that you actually have a lot of work to do. So you become almost like an advice to innovators. And then the question is also if regulators have the necessary staff to be able to do that, right? And if that then maybe starts a question among regulators, like where's the border between what can be expected from us? So I think that's a very interesting conversation also to be had. Then you can talk about sandboxes, but also when talking to the Italian regulator, I understood that what they've done is not what I would call a sandbox, but it's probably equally interesting way of organizing regulatory experimentation. And what Italy has done, and you could say there have been 2 rounds so far, maybe meanwhile they have a 3rd round, but in that publication we discussed the first 2. Where the role of the regulator was much more significant, I would say, in designing the experiment. So, as I said, in the Netherlands and the UK, the initiative is more to the project promoter. Project promoter has an idea and tries to get an exemption. In Italy, it was the regulator saying around 2010, you know, we do not yet know the future of EV charging infrastructure. Maybe it will become something that is more like a regulated activity, possibly done by DSOs, or it becomes an activity for market parties. And let's design a pilot, right? They called it a regulatory pilot, and to test both models, and then did a call. So the initiative was with the regulator, and then promoters could respond to that call and test both models. As you can see, this had a length that was somewhat between the one of GB and the Netherlands, so 3-4 years. It was targeted to DSOs and third-party operators of EV infrastructure, charging infrastructure. And as it was designed by the regulator, no surprise that they also managed it. And they had involved an expert group, basically, to help them select the projects. I also learned that the Italian regulator put a lot of emphasis on transparency. So the idea was that if certain innovators get exceptions to the rules, they have almost like a duty to share that experience for everyone, right? So you have been selected, okay, but that doesn't mean that you should, not share your experience. So there is a lot of emphasis in Italy on this final report that has to be public and shared. And also interesting is that there was funding connected to the approval of the project. So it's like a package, right? A bit of funding and also exceptions to the rule. Then in Italy, they had a good experience with these very first pilots. You know that meanwhile, the clean energy package has decided that the model for EV charging infrastructure is market-based, right? So, but yeah, this happened way after these pilots in Italy. So you could say that Italy, before having a European legislation that harmonizes the approach to EV charging, they were already testing both possible models. And then in 2017, they applied the same approach to a completely different topic. They wanted to get more participation of decentralized energy resources in balancing markets. And the rules at that time were in Italy not yet adapted to really allow that. So they again wanted to do tests, right? Certain pilots within certain areas. And they used this, what they call regulatory experimentation to do it. So who could apply at that time? It was more, of course, aggregators that can bring this DER into balancing markets. And given that it's balancing markets, there was also a close cooperation with the TSO. And again, there was this emphasis on that public report, right, to create benefits for everyone and not only the ones running the project. Then you could say, okay, you had the GB, you had the Netherlands, you had the Italian model, 3 different models, but 3 pioneers that I think were quite early in trying out this kind of regulatory experimentation. And today, I think we see a second wave of regulatory experimentation, and it turns out that most other countries have followed the model rather of GB and the Netherlands, and I see less the model that was followed by Italy for the moment. Maybe I'm wrong, but I have the impression that most people go in the direction of sandboxes. And we had the opportunity to collaborate with in this consortium e-Universal. We were lucky to have people from different countries, and each colleague in that consortium took care of analyzing these countries. And don't worry if you cannot read the details of the table. I have a next slide to highlight some of the main lessons learned, but I just want you to be aware that if you the report is publicly available, so if you want all the details, there is a lot of details in that report thanks to this collaboration of people, colleagues from different countries. And as you can see, we didn't look at only at all these countries. We also analyzed them from all these different dimensions we know matter. And let me give you a bit highlights of the findings in this slide. So I reorganized the same information you saw on the previous slide into a yes/no. So if you are designing a regulatory sandbox, there are a few questions you have to consider and few choices you have to make. And as you can see with this mapping, countries clearly made different choices. So it seems we do not yet know what's the best way to do it, and that's fine. No? So it seems we are also experimenting with regulatory experimentation. Maybe that's the main finding. But just to give you a flavor, so a key choice to be made is if you have a dedicated call or not. So what do I mean? Well, you can just say project promoters can come whenever they want and present themselves, and we will look at these proposals case by case. Or you can say, no, there is two times a year, we organize an open call, and that's the moment you have to submit. And I don't know how many projects will go, but you could say as a regulator, in some countries that has been done, we will approve maximum, I don't know, 10 projects in this call. So the best 10 projects will be awarded, right? And then you do another call. So that's one way to organize the work, right, for a regulatory authority. And as you can see, this approach with a dedicated call was followed in these 4 countries I put there in the table. But at the same time, the 3 regions in Belgium, Brussels, Flanders, and Wallonia, don't have this call approach, and neither does Norway. Maybe I should go back to the previous slide before I go into the details to tell you that, and that's you can't see it, but that's what on this the first line of the table tells you to what extent this regulatory sandbox is under development or already operational. And so if I understood it well, at least in December 2021, for instance, there is a regulation under development in Spain. But we didn't think there were already projects granted under that legislation. Same in Poland, it was still under development. The same in a few other countries. So I think half of the countries we looked at had a regulation under development, and the other half had already, awarded in a first call or in a first year a few projects. So this second wave is very recent, right? So these are all countries that are just starting with their regulatory sandbox. Okay. So, but here I'm looking at the design. So even if there are no projects yet awarded under the sandbox, the legislation often already gives an indication of the approach, right, the country is following. And then besides this fact, if you have a call or not, a key decision is also if everyone can apply, or whether you have more specified who can apply, because that's what the Netherlands and the UK did, right? Initially, they had even specified it very, very narrowly. And here you can see that indeed several regions or countries have also, reduced who can apply, like Austria, France, and Poland. But there is more and more that here answer yes, right? That just everyone can apply, so no limitation at all. Then also whether or not there is this menu of derogations or whether that is completely open. You see that it's again nicely split in two. Where maybe you can see a trend that most countries go in one direction is on the next thing I have there in the table, on the fact that the regulators seem to be more taking a leading role. It's only in Flanders, where I'm currently living, that it's the ministry that is in the lead, but all the others have put the regulator in the lead, while the ones between brackets, it's a bit of a combination, it seems, with the regulator that together with the ministry is administering this sandbox. Also interesting, I think, is that roughly half of the countries combine the sandbox with funding. So that means that you do one application to get the regulatory exemptions and the funding, while in the other countries, it's two separate processes. So that means you probably first try to get the sandbox and then you try to get the funding. Also, there seems to be a trend towards pushing the projects to do some public reports. While you can see that for those three countries on the right there, I was not sure to what extent there is this obligation to publicly publish the results. In that same report, we then also sort of concluded by saying, okay, there are a few design choices to be made and they have an impact. And I think I've already, during my presentation, gave you some examples of that impact, right? The way the work is organized is really different depending on whether you work with these calls or more continuous applications. Also, whether or not eligible project promoters are predefined or not, the exemptions are predefined or not. So lots of different choices, and I'm sure that certain countries have made certain choices, but maybe after a few years of experience, they might change their design, right? So what is nice is to see that we're all trying, I would say. And then, as a final conclusion, I just wanted to share this with you. So far, when you talk to people about regulatory sandboxes, I would say you have the big believers, and then you have the skeptics. And just to say that, yeah, I mean, I understand also that there are risks, that it's not only positive. So on the positive side, I think they have already proven that they can speed up innovation. This is really true, especially in the area, I would say, of distribution tariffs. I have seen some experiments that maybe otherwise wouldn't have taken place. Also, everything related to energy communities. In my own country, in Belgium, the transposition of the clean energy package to allow energy communities is not yet fully in place. Meanwhile, luckily, we have the sandbox and they have awarded several energy community projects that would otherwise not have been able to go ahead, right? And I know from experience that there are a few very innovative projects in there. So, very, very welcome, I would say. They do speed up innovation. Also, they can help to speed up regulatory change. I think thanks to having some experiments with energy communities, again, I think it can help countries to do the transposition of that legislation to enable communities to everyone, not only the ones in the sandbox. But then, yeah, let's also keep an eye open for these risks. Some people asking for exemptions, should be challenged, right? What you're proposing, is it really innovative, or are you just looking for exceptions to the rules because that gives you an implicit subsidy, right? Or these innovators that have not really done their homework and are more looking for regulatory advice, to what extent should regulators do that, or should they just say, sorry, that's not our role? You also, and I've not yet seen that risk, the second risk we identified there, but you would not want countries to use the sandbox as an excuse to implement regulation that should be available to everyone. And I guess the best example is everything related to energy communities. Today, there should already be a general legislation to enable them, but in some countries there is some delay in the transposition, and you would not want these delays to accumulate, and then countries using the sandbox as an excuse, right? That communities are already possible under the sandbox, so we can take more time to adopt this legislation that we urgently need. So that's it. I see a lot of opportunities. I also acknowledge that there are certain risks that we need to monitor, right? But for the moment, I see more opportunities than risks. So I'm rather positive, I would say. And that was my presentation.
Thank you, Leonardo, for your presentation. Just let me remember that it's possible to send questions through the chat, just to use these 20 minutes of question and answers to continue discussing about the future and the potential of energy regulatory sandboxes. I have a first question. just now you were just talking about the potential of energy regulatory sandboxes in energy defining the conditions of energy communities, and you were talking about the situation in Belgium. In which other issues you consider that energy regulatory sandboxes can be useful for defining this new regulatory framework?
Yeah, I think it's an important question, because we are moving fast, right, at the European level. The clean energy package, if you think about it, has already done really a lot to mainstream some of the innovations that used to take place only in sandboxes. So once the clean energy package is fully adopted, I have a feeling that we really have to reconsider the whole concept of sandboxes. Like, what will be the next wave of innovations, right, that we will enable through sandboxes? And it's not yet fully clear to me. Maybe one I mentioned was these distribution network tariffs. Again, the clean energy package already says that all countries should go in the direction of more cost reflective distribution tariffs. But okay, what does that mean, right? It can still mean many different things. So maybe that's an area where we could see some experimentation, because if you really want cost reflective tariffs, we know that they might be somewhat complex. And for regulators to know how much sophistication, but also how much complexity do we actually want in these tariffs, maybe that is something you can really test in a sandbox. And I saw that in Austria. So in Austria, it seems to be that they don't only work with a call, but they also specify what they would like to see in that call. So it means that if you have a project that doesn't fit in that call, you can still come forward, but you also know what they're looking for. So in that sense, it has a bit the design of in Italy, where the regulator really says what they want, but it also has a design of a more open sandbox where still you can propose other things. And they are really asking also for projects around network tariffs. Maybe another domain where we might see some developments is, well, as electricity regulation has already advanced a lot, you know now that there is a proposal on the table to also do some similar things in gas related to renewable gas. Maybe there also we will see new developments, and there the European legislation has not yet fully been developed. So maybe there we might also see new developments. And then I think also we will just find out, right? That's, I think, the beauty of a sandbox is you do not yet know how it will be used, but just having it is good to learn, right? Where we need exemptions. So by keeping it open, I think we will also simply learn, right? What kind of projects will be proposed.
Okay, thank you. We have a question related with the design characteristics. And he says that you were explaining the different characteristics of the different experimentation across Europe in the last years. And the question is which element or which design element perhaps do you consider this is the most relevant in order to guarantee the success of energy regulatory sandbox?
Yeah. Maybe it's hard to choose, but I would say that you can clearly see that some countries, I think, have defined it very carefully, I would say. And I understand that. I would say the length of the derogation shows you how risk willing the willingness there is to take a bit of risk, right? If you allow derogations for only 2 years, like in the UK, that suggests that the authorities are a bit worried about the impact of their so yeah, I would say the length is a key one. If the length is not significant, there is not much you can do as a project, right? So I guess it really starts with the length. And there you see the extreme from 2 years to 10 years was the initial scope between Netherlands and the UK. And now you see that all the other countries are somewhat in the middle. Some are 3-4 years, or there are 5 years. So I guess these are more reasonable length. Maybe 10 years is quite long for some countries. maybe it looks too risky, but maybe then these 3-4 years or 5 years is a good compromise. And maybe some other countries that don't want to start with too much risk, they will start with 2 years, and then maybe if they don't get enough innovation, they will consider to increase it.
Thank you. There is another question, I suppose that is from one of our colleagues in the projects, that says that considering the scope of the project of the Transnet project, that is Spain, France, and Portugal, the question is if you can explain in more detail or offer your insights, your evaluation of the situation of energy regulatory sandboxes in those countries.
So in our project, I don't remember if we looked at Portugal. So we don't have Portugal in the table, right? The benchmarking table, and I don't remember if that is because we didn't have anyone from Portugal to contribute, or whether there is no regulation for sandboxes in Portugal. But we do have France and Spain, and there I understood that in Spain the projects still have to start, but in France there are already a few projects. So it's hard to say a lot about Spain because it's still under development and about to start. So I think there is more to be learned about France. And if your project is for a few years, I think you have the luxury to monitor these countries, and you will have much more data than we had, right? When we looked at it at the end of last year, we could not yet really look at the projects because the projects will come in the coming years. So I would really advise you maybe to not only look at the design, but look at the actual projects. Because that's not what we have done in detail so far. And I would be even myself very interested to know more about the actual projects.
Okay, thank you. There is another question related with regulation specifically, and he says that one of the benefits of the energy regulatory sandboxes is the possibility of removal of some aspects of regulation that is not adapted to the new challenges. But the question is more specifically, in the different experiments in Europe, do you consider that has been the most relevant result of the energy regulatory sandboxes, the modification of the regulation, or just the trial of new model businesses and new technological solutions?
Yeah, well, it's often a combination. So, of course, it has to be also new technologies, new business models. And I think most regulators are looking at these projects from that perspective. So you ask for an exception to the rules, but to do what, right? It has to be something that is technological, innovative, or from a business model point of view, innovative. So I think it has to be both. And then it turned out that some projects were innovative and were even possible under the existing regulations, so they didn't always need the sandbox, even though they thought they needed it, right? So that's also, I think, an interesting observation regulators have made.
Okay, thank you. And I have just a last question about the role of energy regulatory sandboxes in terms of provision of electricity flexibility to the system. They could be an opportunity in order to identify new figures such as community electricity communities or aggregators or demand side participations. The energy regulatory sandboxes could be an excellent and a good tool in order to test these challenges to the system operation.
Yeah, I think so. And we will know better once we see how each country implements the provision of the clean energy package, because I think a lot of the provisions regarding aggregators or flexibility could be implemented with a high ambition or a low ambition. And as we know in Europe, some countries will maybe go for the low ambition, and then I think if the general legislation on these topics is low ambition in some countries, then having a sandbox allows certain projects to be more ambitious, right, than the general framework. So I do think they can play a role there. But to know exactly to what extent, we need to know how these general provisions will be implemented.
And a question related with consumers. Which is the participation of customers in these experiments? They take part of the experiment, they are not participating in the experiment. Which is the situation of society or customers engagement?
Yeah. So the ones where I know the projects better, there I think, as I said, they are often energy community projects. So it's not necessarily the consumers themselves applying for the project, but often the ones applying for the project are very close to consumers. They, often represent a community of consumers, right? So at least in GB and in the Netherlands, these were typically projects that were very close to small consumers and citizens. So, yeah, I think lots of these initiatives have been able to go forward thanks to sandboxes. But it should not necessarily be limited to that. They could also be companies, right, just proposing projects.
Thank you, Leonardo. It has been a pleasure. And now we are going to continue with a presentation of a first deliverable of the project that also is related with design and the elements of the energy regulatory sandboxes. And for us, it will be a pleasure to share with you the results of the advances in this project that is really related with your work, with your research activity in the field of the energy regulatory sandboxes. And we take note of your suggestions in terms of defining to identify the of energy regulatory sandboxes. Thank you. It has been a pleasure for us to come with you in this seminar. And now we are going to continue with Manuel Villa, researcher of Funseam, that will explain the more relevant aspects of this benchmark analysis that we have been doing in the field of the research project. Manuel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. It's a pleasure for me to present today the result of research that we have done from Funseam in the framework of the European project Transnet. The result is this report that aims to help the energy transition, but studying the test environments for innovations. The presentation has 4 points in which I will address the highlights of this report. For in-depth look at this research, you can find the report on Funseam's website and on the Transnet project website. First, it is important to highlight the objective of this research within the objective of the Transnet project. We seek to integrate the study of regulatory innovation into the innovation assessment methodology of living labs. By way of summary, before addressing a full definition, we can define energy sandboxes as innovation supporting test environments in which regulatory innovation is present, an aspect that is missing in the methodological design of the traditional version of living labs. Therefore, our objective is to integrate these two validation approaches for innovations. Therefore, this report is the first result obtained. The objective of this report has been to learn about regulatory sandboxes in order to address their use, within the framework of the innovation challenges that exist in the energy transition. In relation to the energy transition, we can say that its challenges are as follows: increase renewable energies and energy efficiency, to advance in the energy in the sector capping, in the integration of the energy storage, in the development of the flexibility services, in the reduction of environmental impacts, in the promotion of energy communities, and to achieve the decisive aspect, place consumers at the center of the energy system and protect their interests. To face these challenges, the energy transition requires, for example, simplification of the administrative procedures and of course, regulatory innovation. But why we need regulatory innovation in the framework of the energy transition? Because regulation has a lower rate of change that the rate of change of technological innovation. And so, as a result of this difference of rates of change between technology and innovation, we can identify two types of cases that frustrate the entry of new innovation into the market. In the case one happens when technological innovation faces regulatory barriers because it anticipated regulatory innovation. Case two happens when regulatory innovation is ahead of technological innovation. Here, regulation has traditionally been seen as a barrier to innovators who see it as an administrative burden. What is the solution? To ensure that both technological innovation and regulatory innovation go hand in hand. And this is precisely what regulatory sandboxes are for. These innovation tools already have extensive experience in other sectors, such as fintech, for example. But in the energy sector, they are a novelty. As we are involved in a process of energy transition, we can give a concrete definition for what we need regulatory sandboxes in the energy sector. Energy regulatory sandboxes are instruments to support innovation aimed at decarbonizing the economy and helping consumers to access new products and services and protecting their interests. There are already several examples of the use of energy sandboxes around the world. Basically, they are being used in fields where several stakeholders are involved, such as energy communities or in peer-to-peer energy sharing business model. To discuss regulatory sandboxes in detail, we must differentiate them from other types of text environments. In the case of traditional text environments, there is no regulatory innovation at all. In contrast, in energy regulatory sandboxes, regulatory innovation is one of the key players. In traditional text environments, there is limited or no involvement of regulators, and technologies do not have a high level of maturity. In contrast, in energy regulatory sandboxes, regulators participate in a holistic approach alongside other innovative players to help validate business models with validated technologies that face some kind of regulatory barrier to market entry. And how do they work? With a regulatory sandbox, the real environment becomes a controlled environment with limited time and space within which a multi-sectoral approach involving the participation of innovative actors, consumers, innovation agencies, and regulatory agencies. in order to evaluate the derogation of regulations. The ultimate goal is that in an uncontrolled environment, innovations can work and regulators can learn how to create a smart regulation, and that all stakeholders can benefit from innovations. And what are these benefits? Innovation happens faster when innovators can validate their new proposals. The direct communication between innovators, companies, and regulators creates a more cohesive industry. Of course, it is better to test innovation in a real environment with a real customer. Also, successive trial and error tests within a controlled environment mitigate risks. And the tests increase innovator access to capital. Finally, consumers benefit because new and useful technologies arrive to the market more quickly. Having already addressed the context of regulatory innovation in the framework of the energy transition, I will present the situation of these innovation instruments in the Sudoer region. In 2019, France introduced a regulatory sandbox in the energy sector. This regulatory sandbox allows to the Energy Regulation Commission of France to grant exception to facilitate for the experimental deployment of innovative technologies or services in favor of the energy transition and smart network and infrastructure. In Portugal in 2020, the government established the general principles for the creation and regulation of technology-free zones, a type of regulatory sandbox project. The objective of the government is to establish, in collaboration with regulators, universities, and market agents, among others, the conditions to gradually create new business models and solutions in the energy sector. In Spain, in 2020, the law of this year allows the government to establish regulatory tax environment that permit the introduction of novelty, exception of regulatory safeguards that contribute to facilitating research and innovation in the field of the electricity sector. The government tried to promote a more accurate development of the regulation of the energy sector based on pure testing of the regulation on new technologies or solutions. I will now turn to the third part of my presentation to introduce one of the highlights of the report. And that is a package of recommendations that we propose for designing and implementing energy regulatory sandboxes. The model that we propose has been created following the models that have been launched in Germany and England and other countries. The model is composed of 5 phases in which the regulatory agents and the innovators interact with the objective of innovating in regulation and in new products and services. For his implementation, the model proposed a set of questions in each of these phases. These questions can be adapted to the specific context of each country or region. Once the regulator has opened the possibility to submit energy regulatory sandboxes, I start the phase 1. In the phase 1, the innovators submit their application to the energy regulatory sandboxes by presenting the commercial evaluation of the innovation, the regulatory risks, and the possible measures of their mitigation. It is important to define goals and develop measurement indicators and ensure the participation of other interest parties. Innovator must also plan to time and resources to be used and a specific sources of funding for the test environment. In the phase two is the verification of the proposal of the innovator and action of the regulator. The regulator must make their decisions within the framework of the energy transition, of course, and the protection of the consumer's interests. Although innovation may potentially be attractive to consumers, it is understood that new proposals not previously considered within the current regulatory framework may put their interests at risk. After reviewing the proposal, the regulator may find that the regulatory risks to the innovator does not exist. Therefore, the sandboxes will not be necessary, and only clarification, support, or monitoring of the current regulation will be enough. In the phase three, um, sorry, in the phase three is the preparation of the energy regulatory sandboxes. Phase three already has a deep participation of the regulator and innovator to determine its party commitments, possible derogation that must be carried out, and the repercussions that doing should might bring, mainly for consumers. Sorry, are identified here as ways to mitigate existing risks. During this phase, the text financial support and duration are defined and measured to determine their success or failure. It is also crucial to review the actions that other external agents must carry out, such as external audits or security validation in data handling. And crucially, a plan for transition must be established after the test period. And once the sandbox has been prepared, it is possible to launch it. This is important because it is the starting point for the derogation of the regulations, if this has been the case. The phase four is the phase of the experimentation. Here, the innovator starts the innovation and studies his operation under controlled conditions, which emulate the real environment. Here, regulator participation is active, mainly to learn about the effect, risk, scope, and scalability of regulatory derogations. The energy sandboxes are focused on coordinating the interaction of a product technically already validated with the regulation that protects the interests of all the parties interested in the energy transition. But it is not focused on technically measure the product during the experimental period. In the last phase, the five, validation implies knowing if the energy regulatory sandboxes fulfilled his goals within the framework of the objectives as described in his design. The positive or negative result of the validation does not imply the restructuration of adaptation of the regulation, meaning the decision to maintain the regulatory exception, replicate or escalate them. The market entry of the innovation does not necessarily depend on the overall result of the text, or in other words, on the modification of the regulation for the effective operation of the innovation. Finally, we can say that it is possible to take regulatory innovation and innovative products and or services in the market. I would like to close this presentation with a keynote aspect for a successful regulatory sandbox in the field of energy transition. Of course, the first thing we need is for the energy regulatory sandboxes to have a direct relationship with the energy transition. And in this process, the consumer is at the center of the transformation of the system. The energy regulatory sandboxes are required to validate business model with already validated technologies, in order to help regulation itself to innovative. Finally, sandboxes should have a holistic approach. The holistic nature of the energy regulatory sandboxes is also related to the transversality of the energy sector in the different industrial businesses and institutional sectors. Therefore, the active participation of the interested parties in the results of the test is fundamental for the success of the energy regulatory sandboxes. And that was my presentation. Thank you very much. The report is online in the website of the Funseam.
Thank you, Manuel, for your presentation and for sharing with us the most relevant aspects when designing an energy regulatory sandboxes. Let me say that one of the last words, it was the relevance of the participation of third parties and the relevance of holistic approaches, where all the interested parties participate in the design and the definition of the energy regulatory sandboxes. Without any doubt, the participation of companies, the participation of technological centers, the participation of consumers when trying to identify which are the more relevant challenges, the more relevant barriers in the energy regulatory framework and in the energy transitions is extremely relevant. It's extremely relevant. And we are going to continue with the following roundtable, where we have an outstanding participation of such actors, companies, technological centers, and the representation of the TSO, the DSO, that they are carrying out relevant experimentation in the field of the technology and energy transition. As a moderator, we have the pleasure of having Germán López from CTA. Germán, thank you for being with us. It's a pleasure. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jan. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jan. I would like to congratulate you and Funseam for the organization of this webinar. There is no doubt that innovation is required in the energy sector if the ambitious objectives of stated at the international level are going to be fulfilled. At the European level, as you know, countries have their own national determined contribution plans, which establishes the goals in terms of reduction of greenhouse gases emissions, percentage of renewable energy sources, and in the final energy consumption, improvement of energy efficiency. And one of the main pillars of the energy transition is the electricity, as a significant part of the demand is being electrified currently. Due to this electrification process, there is a clear goal to generate as much as possible green electricity. This has been obtained thanks to the efforts made during the last years in innovation. The situation that, for example, some technologies as PV, for example, and wind are currently the cheapest way of generating electricity, of new electricity. And due to this, innovation has been very important, and also, of course, not just technological, but also business models. And we hope that also regulatory matters, as this is the main goal of this webinar. However, it's crystal clear that it's needed to speed up this energy transition process. As we can see, unfortunately, during the last 2 weeks, that have additionally have had an effect on the energy price. One of the tools that could contribute to speed up the energy transition are the sandboxes that have been very well explained by previous speakers. And in this session that we are going to start, we have 3 speakers which are going to provide their views on this aspect. The profiles of these participating entities are different, which will allow us to have a broader view on this issue. We will have the representative of Elewit, the technological platform that was recently set up by the TSO of Spain, Red Eléctrica España. It will be also participating Endesa, which is an entity very much concerned with the energy transition, and as a DSO has to face important challenges to ensure a reliable electricity supply. And we initially will have the opportunity to know the point of view of Futured. Futured is the Spanish technological platform of electrical grids, and it integrates different agents involved in the electricity sector. The platform is involved in the definition and promotion of strategies aimed at consolidating a more advanced network capable of responding to challenges as digitalization, flexibility, and so on. We will start with the representative of this entity, who is Enrique Morgades, who is the Secretary General of Futured, and he has more than 15 years experience working in the energy sector, and he works for CIRCE, a technological center located in Zaragoza, and also a member of the Transnet project. Enrique, over to you, please.
Sorry, I was mute. Thank you, Herman. It's a pleasure to listen and see you again, and also my colleagues from this roundtable, and an honor to be here. Thank you, the Transnet project, and also Joan and all the team for inviting us. So I brought a short presentation. Trying to give you the overview of what the work by Futured has been done in the past 2 years related to energy regulatory sandboxes, where we have been pretty active, as I said, since May 2020, working on this. And I will try to expose you which is the position of Futured regarding this instrument with which we understand, and we think that it's very, very important to foster technology innovation in the field of smart grids. So I will support my speech on this presentation. I will try to be brief and to stick to the 15 minutes that we set at the beginning. I'm trying to. Okay, now it's working. So first of all, a brief overview of what Futured is. So we are, as Herman introduced, the Spanish technology platform for smart grids or electricity networks. We were founded in 2005, and we have over 166 members, both Elewit, Red Eléctrica España, and Endesa are also part of the platform. And our goal is to promote technological development in the field of smart grids as a key element to achieve the objectives of energy transition, and to ensure that innovation and collaboration between agents achieve this goal. So we are like a forum to foster innovation in a sector that was not so fast in the past, but in the recent years has gained a lot of dynamism and also agility to foster innovation and to achieve the goals. And I think that we can congratulate ourselves that Spain is one of the technological leaders in smart grids, for sure. So we are a forum composed mainly by companies. We have in our platform business, electricity companies, of course, manufacturers, service providers, but also academy, research centers, universities, and different associations. And we also embrace public bodies, public administration, who are also very important to ensure that in a regulatory sector, as we are, the development of technology and innovation achieve the final aim of having more efficient and more reliable electricity and energy in our country. So I would like to introduce briefly what we have done in the past 2 years in a working group working on flexibility that has dealt with energy regulatory sandboxes. You can here see which the partners were. Endesa was leading, in fact, this working group, and it was composed by different distribution companies from Spain, also different associations and organizations, a lot of industry and also research organizations that has finally developed two. Sorry, I'm having some problems with the that one. That has finally developed two different documents that I will introduce briefly, and that I invite you to download and check in the after this webinar. So we started our work, as said, in May 2020, and we understood that flexibility was an important issue for the future smart grid, and flexibility had some technological barriers, but also regulatory barriers to be implemented into the networks. So we started assessing which are the flexibility characteristics and also the flexibility technology enablers that we see for the smart grid, to keep working afterwards in a common regulatory sandbox feature that we understand should be somehow followed, or at least we suggested for the public administration here in Spain, that is dealing, as our colleagues Manuel and Leonardo said before, that are dealing with the development of the specific regulation here in Spain, who are the CNMC and also the Ministry of Energy and ecological transition. To finally, and it's the stage we are working now, to have a final analysis of results on the projects. So this first document that I'm showing you is called Flexibility in Smart Grids, and is a complete overview of these 4 items that you see in the picture. First, the normative and regulatory framework that we already have at the European level, that is pushing our development also at national level, and how are we now at national levels in regards to this regulatory framework for flexibility. Which are the flexibility services that we see for the future may have an important role to foster the new energy transition scenario? Which are the technological solutions and the acquisitions mechanisms that we find for this flexibility? So the main characteristics that we see for flexibility are divided in these 2 parts: the technical part and also the economical part. And where these are the main issues we see. I wouldn't go much in detail through this, as this is not the focus is not so technical here, and we want to discuss about regulatory sandboxes. But the issue here is that to ensure or to deploy effectively the flexibility, we have a barrier that is clear, that is regulation. So for us, it's a key aspect, and this is one of the messages that I want to share with you. One of the messages is that to ensure innovation in not only in flexibility, but to ensure innovation in the smart grid, the sandbox is an opportunity, as mentioned before, but I think it's a must. And one of the things I see working with some of the experts that you already know, like Jose Pablo and also Javier and Daniel, and some of the colleagues we are working in this working group, we believe that the innovation leaders, or some of the countries, at least some of the countries that have already implemented in the past regulatory sandboxes has some advantages in comparison to others that has some delays or are still developing the regulatory framework. And this is a key point, but because we see, and I will share this in the conclusions at the end, we see that if we want to maintain our leadership, as we believe that Spain is leader in technology development in smart grids, if we want to maintain our leadership, we have to accelerate the process of developing this regulation and implementing it effectively, so that companies, both end users, manufacturers, technology developers, can get to a framework in which they can compete and experiment towards future deployment. So this is an important aspect. So one of there are three parts regarding flexibility acquisitions mechanism. So the coordination between TSO and DSO, the long-term markets, and the local markets. And some of the recommendations that you already know, and that were some of them were mentioned, are of course the Article 32 of the European Directive that allows DSOs to acquire and activate flexibility service and the operation procedures that are according to this regulation. This regulation relationships between this new flexibility mechanism and the existing ones, the current markets and operating procedures, are necessary to resolve the interaction between these two parts of the market. The integration of access, connection criteria, and the different flexibility mechanisms are also a key part. And of course, there should be, and this is one of the key aspects that we believe that is somehow delaying the process here in Spain, is that the remuneration framework for DSOs needs to develop incentives for the adoption of flexibility service rather than the current developing scenario that we have, at least here in Spain, so that we ensure that we encourage efficient development of the network by means of new mechanisms rather than the existing ones that we already have in place. So this first document was an important part to ensure that we understand how flexibility can help the development, the efficient development of the network and the efficient development of the markets. But our purpose was to understand how the regulatory sandboxes play a role here. So we developed from March last year until September a new deliverable, which is called the flexibility in Smart Grids Part 2, that deals with an approach on how the features and the process for regulatory sandboxes would look like, so as to ensure that we foster innovation, and also we ensure an important part that also was mentioned by Leonardo, is that we share experiences to help improve and to help deliver faster innovation procedures into the market. So this new document that has been discussed also with the ministry and also with the regulatory agency here in Spain deals with three parts, which are the solutions, how we can coordinate the regulatory agents in this field, and also the identification of barriers in the smart grid scenario, to finally design the characteristics of a regulatory sandboxes and an application guide for the case of smart grids and flexibility projects, with a particularization of different use cases, and I will share one of those in this presentation. So this is an important part. We made a deep analysis of the current normative at a European and Spanish level, and of course the national framework drives innovation through instruments such as regulatory sandboxes and pilot projects. That was already discussed in 2019 and 2020, but the specific formula is not yet delivered, and this is something that we are expecting. I already recall the 32 article of the European directive, and I won't go again through it. But there is an important part that we have already initiatives that may impact in the market, like the regulatory demonstration projects that were already discussed and published in the Article 24 of the communication that was made by the CNMC in 2019, and also in the Royal Decree that we got in 2020 that introduced the regulatory test banks, as we call, that must be covered by a Royal Decree that is under development right now, and we expect during this first semester of 2022 to be published by the public administration, so as to go ahead with this instrument. We have several questions here, and an important one I think that Leonardo discussed a lot about lessons learned that we can perceive from other countries, and there were some questions also when we discussed with the different national authorities about if we should go to open calls, to closed call, which would be the timings. There were some indefinition here, and this is the process they are going through now, and we expect to have an effective instrument in the near future, so that we can foster projects, because there is a real interest from the industry to go ahead with this instrument and to deliver effective projects in the future. So we already have the grounds in Spain to get this instrument work, and we only need the final step to be made by the public administration to enable the sector to go with innovation projects. So how we see that a sandbox request should go, we divided the process in nine phases. Manuel was talking about also a different process. So these 9 phases, first of all, of course, the sandbox proposal preparation, the subsequent request, and the approval. And this is a process that is dealt with the public administration depending on how they publish and they set and defines the architecture of the framework. But from us, which is important, is this part, and of course to make the appropriate follow-up of the project, to be sure that we get appropriate results and conclusions once we have the sandbox completed and the project is delivered, to get a final report. But what is more important is the final regulatory report and lessons learned that should feed immediately the public administration, so as to accelerate new regulatory development in the sector. So the faster we can make projects where we have impact and relevant lessons learned, the best we can make the future definition of the regulatory framework for a real deployment of changes that can accelerate decarbonizations and the goals we have. So we have some use cases, and I will go just through one that we define and it's very clear, and you already know, maybe because it's discussed in different academia and also in different journals and papers, is deferring network investments due to natural growth in user demand by activating flexibility market. And we discussed here as a use case to make an example to the public administration on how these sandboxes could work, dividing the example in a template that is also delivered. Who are the actors? Of course, here are the DSO, and so-called DNM, according to the Spanish specific wording, the market operator, the flexibility service provided, and also the transmission network manager, which is the current solution we have that you already know. We have an investment plan for several years that is made mainly by an asset-based remuneration, and the new proposed model that is, as I mentioned, activating flexibility markets, local flexibility markets, to ensure that we can compensate the natural growth in user demand by means of a more efficient solution, or at least trying to ensure that this could be an efficient solution. So I have only 2 minutes, and I will go very fast because I want to go to the conclusions. But we have here a complete disclosure of the proposed model. Of course, this everything on the document I shared with you. The condition of efficiency, which is very important to ensure, which is the efficiency condition to evaluate that this new model is better than the current one, and how we are going to evaluate this in a potential project, and the customer benefit. There was a lesson learned arised by Manuel. Of course, the new market is customer centric, and we have to ensure that the customer finally benefits from these new proposals, which are the current regulation barriers that we have and that we want to modify, and also the risks. And to go to my final slide and my final thoughts on this work that we have been done during the past months, almost 2 years, is the following one. So sandboxes are an instrument to promote regulatory innovation, and I think that we have seen a very effective market, and also instruments to foster technology development. And I think technology is already ready to be implemented effectively, or to develop very fast when a gap is identified. But of course, the innovative business models are not so fast, and we have to ensure that we have the instrument to do that, because this will make the difference in the near future. We need more definition on the procedure to follow to develop flexibility sandboxes in distribution networks, and this we expect to have a more clear definition in the following months, as I mentioned before. It's necessary to separate the application and development of the sandboxes from the source of financing for the execution. This is also a lesson learned arose by Leonardo, and that we already see. Of course, the finance is important, but we have to disclose or split completely these two parts to ensure that finance can get from other sources, to ensure that once we have the sandbox, we are effective to implement it. The administration must define the competences of the different institutions. The sandboxes are, of course, an opportunity to test different contracting schemes, and this is a key factor to test and finally deploy effectively the new regulation that is to come, and that is fostered by the European directives. And of course, we see that the sector has a high interest in develop sandboxes projects. There have been some expressions of interest, and also there have been some public calls already in Spain that were finally not so satisfactory in terms of financing, but just in terms of people and agents participating. That so we are convinced that once we have this instrument working, there will be plenty of projects that will bring a lot of innovation and a lot of discovery for the future energy scenario definition. And that's all from my part. I thank you again, and I want to invite you to share with you these documents, and invite you to read them if you find them interesting.
Thank you very much, Enrique. Thank you for the presentation. It has been very clear, and you have a lot of conclusions that we have to see which are the steps to be taken, all of them, but step by step, let's say. Quite a lot of them. Thank you very much. Now we move to Rafael Sanchez. Rafael Sanchez is the CEO of Endesa in Andalusia and Extremadura. He has been working for Endesa for very many years, and also we are from the same city. We have to see on the screen. He has been working for more than 25 years in Endesa, developing different innovative projects. And for example, he has been involved and is leading different innovative projects, as for example, the ICT Sevilla, that he has been developing from the very beginning. Rafa doesn't need more presentations because he's a very well-known person in the sector. Rafa, over to you.
Thanks, Germán, and thanks to all the friends of Funseam, Maite, Joan, Deborah, Manuel. I feel like home with you. I have a short presentation in order to share our main arguments or main issues of both projects. The project first that refer Germán is ICT Sevilla, and second, launched the past year ICT Málaga. Cities are playing a key role in the challenge of energy transition and in terms of sustainability, because that represents a small area, but with a large concentration of world population, GDP, and 2/3 of the primary energy consumption and emissions. ICT is a public-private collaboration project of entities committed to the net zero emission agenda, which aims to accelerate in a small area that could manage as a sandbox, a regulatory sandbox in the main part. The first project is launched in Isla de la Cartuja. Isla de la Cartuja was the first project they launched in 2019. We signed a protocol with Junta Andalucía, Cartuja Scientific Park, and the Council of Civil and Endesa as leading as a technical project. Now we are more than 69 institutions because after seeing, we open to the rest of companies, public bodies, associations, universities, and others. From larger to smaller size have been admitted to date. The common element of interest is to be a neighbor of the island, it's an isolated island, and assume the commitment of sustainability and the challenge proposed by the project, because the project needs the active participation of the buildings, the citizens and cars and the rest of elements. Also, the past year, we launched ICT Málaga. It's a second version. It's not the same philosophy and project. Málaga needs, in September in 2021, another project related with circular cities. The circularity is another issue in terms of sustainability for future, and we are present in Málaga since 2009 with the Smart City Málaga project, and that has been supporting research, developing, and innovation ecosystem around networks, the smart grids and the rest of elements. And today is the lab city that has developed and implemented innovative solutions related with the advanced network monitoring and flexible operation regarding the future trends and the future role of DCO. The locations is needed to create a sandbox. For us, they are the best place to launch and deploy that idea. The first, ICT Sevilla, is in Isla de la Cartuja. It's a site that combines the past, the present, and future. In the past, they host in 1992 an universal exposition, and since that time and until today, we are now more than 500 companies, a huge and large turnover of workers, and in a small and concrete surface, because as you can see, their city and the island was surrounded by the river, the Guadalquivir River. An important issue is that on that space there are a lot of research of groups, a lot of researchers, trainees, students with the most famous engineers faculties in Seville. And another important issue is that include as a neighbor, an additional neighbor, the Joint Research Center, that, as you probably know, is an important scientific activity that defends all the studies of European Commission, with more than 400 investigators. Is the best place to mix and to merge and to transfer the knowledge toward the implementation of that idea into the market. The design and the technology part is a small area, but in terms of consumption is close to a city of 50,000 inhabitants in terms of comparison with a small city. Also, Malaga Tech Park is the second park, another scientific park with 25 years of history, and is the motor of economy in the Malaga, and represent more or less close to the 8% of GDP, and very close to the future space of World Expo in 2027. I cross my fingers. In the title of this worldwide exhibition is a sustainable city, citizen, innovation, environment, and so on. And we want to prove that it's possible to have a sustainable city before the next exhibition. As you can see, they are very similar aspect, very close and very controlled project to deploy a regulatory sandbox, fundamental based on sustainability and energy. I deploy more time in my exposition in the first, because they have 2 years since the launch. It's true that we have passed the COVID pandemic, and we have some difficulties to advance because the situation, but we are achieved more than 31 goals that are considered in the scheduled program. The 3 parts that we have is very similar to the previous exposition from Manuel and Enrique. Sandbox preparation, awareness, addition, and then the ecosystem now in order to deploy all the project. And if we analyze the results of these 2 first years, we have 69 members, companies added to the project. It's very participative, very open innovation ecosystem. Regarding is a research of Gassman, Enkel, and Chesburg in 2010. It's a study that I recommend to understand the position of ecosystem formulas in order to advance in a terms collaborative. Their contribution may come both aspects, to deploy some elements of the project, and secondly, to participate, because they have buildings, they have people and cars, element of transport and communication. They must refurbish and transform his habits. The habits appears in that project in building facilities in order to be a part of the solution. We merge many times, more than 80 work meetings, and some figures that could show the movement is that now a half of the energy of the island is yet renewable energy. It's not produced locally yet. In the next year, in 2022, our next goal is to collect that energy renewables inside in the island. But now all the participants are moving to renewables and moving to energy efficiency goal. The main energy efficiency goal is to achieve a decrease of 40% of energy primary consumptions. The Agencia Andaluza de la Energía was characterized more than 41 buildings. These buildings belongs to 55 buildings involved in the project. That represent the 3/4 parts of the energy consumption on the project. We are moving ahead and with very, very strong push. You can see that figures in the part. I don't stop to explain, but you can see that the project needs conscientization, meetups, analyze, understand the goals, communication, and the four main processes that are involved in the project that are related with energy, buildings, mobility or transport, and digital. That are the four main areas to work, and you can see in the timeline series in the period that we are advancing ahead. In next slide, you can see also the progress summary. There are a lot of signal lights in green to red, the goals that we achieved in the past year. Not all is easy. It's very complex to move some parts of the project. When you must to refurbish a city, there are a lot of elements involved. The project required a great effort in transforming and refurbishment technologies, but that could demonstrate that the security supply based on an isolated electrical system. You can see that, for example, the smart grids are in close to 90% of equipment with a lot of elements, but other parts they are in going ahead, but don't complete because that the other colors that are not green, no? They are red and yellow. I would like to move ahead to the convergence on energy and digital sector, because I consider that is very interesting to understand that part. The project could achieve more than 175 million euros in all the areas that I explained before, aiming to reurbanize the environment to guarantee the supply through 100% renewable energy, a significant improvement of energy efficiency, at least in the 50 largest building. We want to move to smart buildings in the future, achieve electric mobility, at least a quarter on one half of the movement in the island, and to be in the future target of European Commission, but 25 years ahead, similar of the goals of cities in 2050 and the middle of the cycle. We need to identify that in terms of geographical coordinates. You can see the joke putting that long energy sandbox. You can see it on this slide, the fingerprint of each project. That represent all the year, all the month, all the hours. In terms of peak load for electrical system, is a combination of different elements. They are not two cities on identical projects. you can be that is a combination of different elements as climate, size, density, consumption of elements, dispersion, and that similar fingerprint is in Seville, and we want to move in the project the second ECDS, the common issue, but in the Seville we want to be a self-sufficiency and in an isolated electrical model like Canary Island or El Hierro Island, for example. And secondly, Malaga, as I mentioned before, is a circular city model regarding the rest of the element. The project has a lot of magnitude, a lot of parameters. In the slide, you can see the main characteristics of these areas, equivalent both to cities of 5,000 inhabitants and the half for Malaga. And peak consumption, you can see in red in the middle of the graph of the left side. That is the consumption on July. And that means that the challenge is related with the cooling degree days. Is no winter is summer, the peak, and you can see that on that part that have in our latitude 3,000 hours of sunshine per year is very easy to produce locally based on photovoltaics and self-consumption. But for us, the future energy model will have distributed with energy resources, with intelligence and connectivity, very easy to be able and to supply in real time a demand based on supply, 100% renewable model and electric. And the self-sufficiency of the first project and the secondly was the complementary vision of both sandbox. What the main step? The main step, as the colleague of Future mentioned before, is the grid, when smart grid move ahead. In the past year, 2021, we invest more than 1 million euros, and that represents 44 low voltage supervisors. That they are elements that sensorize of the medium and low voltage grid. That represent that we collect a lot of magnitudes. We could introduce that on both in two apps, EDA and DTS, alarm listening and detection and distribution transformer supervision. And we could manage new elements on the grid as voltage, temperatures, intensities, alarms. And if we combine this with remote control, that we have more than 32, and LARS for us is a system that represents the philosophy on smart grid evolution, a system that could manage fault detection, isolation, and recovery the system without an human. Is possible to operate the mode in three modes: automatic, semi-automatic, and off. And LARS reduce the time scheduled for reduce the management of the grid. You can see all the elements deployed in colors in the right side of the screen. In terms of flexibility, that appears a lot in the previous presentation. I would like to explain what is our vision in the project, because we consider that DCO is that achieve a new role must move from utility to platform. You know probably that we speak a lot of platformization. It's not an easy word to explain, but let me try with these slides. First of all, we have different steps, different levels. When the customer needs sustainability, they have energy efficiency, renewables, green tariffs, and other elements. That's the actual side. But it's not enough, because this is a consumer, it's not a prosumer. The prosumer appears when DCO could manage the smart grid. And the smart grid is an enabler of the distributed energy resources. That means that when you combine with service very sophisticated, that could appears the centralization, and the consumer appears with another noun that is prosumer. Prosumer has a part on the local balance system, because they have probably solar in the rooftop, storage, electric vehicles, dispatchable demand side response, and other elements. But let me show the last part of that story. Is when appears the smart services. In the future scenario, when you introduce digitalization in the grid, you could manage the prosumers as an active platform with aggregator, with a very futuristic model as a transactive energy based on blockchains. That could appears the concept of transumer. Transumer for us is the consumer that evolve to prosumers and take part, active part, and economical part. It was the scenario that's our glory in the area of neighbors. And when you can see on the floor a lot of elements that could manage the rest of elements that could manage this platform. They need BMS, telcos, data lakes, algorithm. There are a lot of elements that combine the argument of energy sector, electrical sector, and digital solutions. A second and more important part in the island. In Europe, the buildings are responsible of 40% of energy consumption, and the island must reduce at least a third of the consumption, and that means that we analyze a lot of buildings, we propose a lot of refurbishment, and also self-consumption. That is a part that are involved the regional authorities based on la Consejería and the Hacienda, and that part belongs to Agencia Andaluza de Energía. It's similar to IDAE national level. We start with energy audits using smart readiness indicator and in proposing improve on energy efficiency in existing buildings. We need only to move ahead more or less 50 buildings, and as you remember before, is a 10% of the island neighbors. They are a Pareto concentration, very interesting for the project. Also, we could see in the future 2 buildings that are very close to zero consumption, near zero emission buildings. And usually we are pushing a lot of effort in air conditioning, as I mentioned also before. The connected energy hub is a part, is a part very actual proposed. We propose in the project to work in a regulatory sandbox to create a future market prototypes that today doesn't exist. Based on flexibility, on aggregation, on demand side, we made a memory with all this key actor relevance that appears in the down of the slide. And we want to deploy, it's not a local energy community that has several aspects on consideration when you analyze in terms of jurists. That is a community that is like a cooperation between members entities in a participatory way, taking advantage of the potential proximity under 500 meters, and they could converge, offering the exits and digitalization with the buildings that combine in the north of the island of Cartuja. is not enough because the flow of change the mix to 100% of renewable needs to deploy some smart parking very close to the local community areas. There are parkings that need to assure 30 megawatt photovoltaics in Seville and 10 megawatt photovoltaics in Malaga. And what is the solution for us? The solution could be managed by parkings. You have a surface like this, then you build and
Perfecto. Ahora seguimos con... sorry. We will continue with Rafa in just a minute. I think I just can say that it's an amazing thing what Endesa is doing here in Andalusia, and these two projects are very good. If Rafa cannot connect now, Rafa, can you talk?
Yes, I'm
Yes.
here. I'm not sure if
Please
you
go
can
on.
hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. And you were talking about when you were at the PV parks, let's say.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure if we could summarize and give more time to only short message, additional message. The sandbox is also for autonomous mobility. It's another possibility that could appear in terms of sandbox. We have launching, analyzing several projects in Malaga and Seville. That's a key issue, not related with the energy. Also related with the drones and rest of element. We made some meetings with Johan Stierna from the Joint Research Center and analyzing the rest of projects in Europe. And let me finalize only with a part with the digitalization with two messages. Both parks are digital innovation hubs. That means that we have an ecosystem very close to the digital part. In Malaga also, we launched a foundation named Innova IRV, Instituto Ricardo Valle, very close to that ecosystem that could advance ahead. But for us, the convergence between energy and platform of digitalization, only to finalize my presentation, are connected with that slide. We speak about the energy cloud. The energy cloud is the mix of electricity with the sensorization of IT. And I end my exposition, waiting your question and answer later.
Thank you very much, Rafa. Because it is very difficult to sum up the things that you are doing right now. I know, but anyway, there is a lot of information on the web, and I'm sure that you will feel okay to explain in more detail. And later on, there will be some questions. Now we have to move to the next speaker, who is Elena de Benavides. Hello, Elena. Elena is in charge of Elewit, a technological platform set up by Red Electrica not a long time ago, 2 or 3 years ago. She will explain us their view on this. Elena has a lot of experience in the innovation, and currently she leads the open innovation and entrepreneurship activity at Elewit. Elena, hand over to you.
Thanks, Herman. It's a pleasure to see you again. Now on the screen, not in Seville like a couple of weeks ago, but talking again about one of our passion, innovation in the energy sector. And obviously, thanks Funseam, Joanne, and all the team. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of Red Electrica Group and Elewit, sharing point of view about sandboxes and how important are they to lead the goals we have in the energy sector regarding with the energy transition. Elewit, as Herman said before, is the technology platform of the Red Eléctrica group. We push the innovation of the group, adding new capabilities with a strong collaboration with the innovation ecosystem into sector, which are the key of our century, energy and telecommunication. Our mission is to contribute to the energy transition on the basis of technology and innovation with clear objectives. Climate neutrality based on a more flexible grid to integrate higher volumes of renewable energies. Electrification of the economy as a tool for decarbonization and putting consumer at the center of the system. And digitalization, which is spreading and is allowing the massive deployment of electrification, as Rafa said before. With this context, I would like to share with you the vision from a TSO innovation area regarding to how have or not have a regulated sandbox affects to our day-by-day activity. Let me try. It doesn't work. Okay. First of all, for us, innovation and sandboxes have a very strong similarity. Both of them are based on learning by doing. Innovation is the answer to what, and sandboxes is the context that allow that companies turn this what from a POC into real. So it's the answer to how. Okay, it's not working very good, sorry. Our sectors and our companies are living a changing context regarding energy transition that I think that looks like that kind of situation. We have to run to achieve a clear target, decarbonization. Those quick movement let us try new things like jump, that means innovation. And we have to find a way to introduce different point of view, even opposite, new stakeholders, new value propositions, finding a new status quo. So one way is obviously through regulation. So innovation and regulation must go hand in hand in a very regulated sector like our. A couple of years ago, A couple of years ago, our power system was based on generation, transmission, consumption. Quite easy for regulation and for the system operator. The current situation is a little bit complex with new players, new stakeholders, adding new situation and complexity to the grid operator. But the huge change will come in a close future. We know this is the path to achieve the climate neutrality, but how are we able to guarantee the safety and keep the higher standard of security of the electric system, having to integrate all these new technologies without trying them in a real context? Okay. At the end of the day, energy transition is a journey from the present to a decarbonized future. And for that journey, we only have two tools, innovation and rules. So what we can do, or let me an example. Sorry, it's a journey in which the whole society is in the same car, which is our current energy sector, driving towards a final destination, a decarbonization future. But with the car and with the driving regulation in place, we already know that we won't get to the final destination. So what we can do, we can change the car and we can change the driving regulation. And we have to change both. Why? Because if I am testing new flying car, for example, or a car with functionalities that allow faster but safer driving, we need that regulation allow us to take that car safely and fail safely and safely learn. Maybe not in the main road, maybe in a separate road with no cars, no pedestrian, but we need this test environment at least for some time. And then In case of success, we need the regulation being eventually modified so that the or drive or flying car we can drive it safely. But if we translate it into our day by day activity, in Elewit we have, sorry, it doesn't working again. Let's send me that connect. Okay, now in Elewit we are able to work and invest with technological startups who help us to drive for mission. And with them, we are trying to understand how, for example, the development of a 100% electric train could impact in the grid operation, or the future of storage with a lot of proof of concept with companies like Hestec. But what in between the proof of concept and the real operation? Well, the answer is clear. We are talking about that all this afternoon. We definitely need. Sorry, it doesn't work again. Okay. We definitely need this temporary regulation to facilitate innovation. It's necessary to start up as soon as possible with these regulatory sandboxes. We have some good news, but as Leonardo said before, but we need to have visibility on what the next steps will be. So from the vision of a TSO, we understand that sandbox should temporarily eliminate the disincentive to innovation inherent to the application of the general framework of innovation project. Mainly, and we think that mainly in three topics should be addressed or eliminated. First of all is cross-activity or cross-sector limitation. Limitation on carrying out or cutting projects. We can add a lot of knowledge joining project of Red Eléctrica Group with other companies inside or outside of the energy sector, and taking into account the impact of regulation inside the electricity sector. For example, air navigation, if you are developing a drones project, as Rafa said before, for example, or telecommunication. And the second point is regarding to risk and balance. In the meaning of the assumption by the regulated company of the entire risk of innovation project, delays due to the standard procedures, incompatibilities with the standard requirement, cost of projects that do not become regulated assets. So we think that progress should be made in the specific remuneration treatment of those projects under risk sharing scheming, like in other business situations. And at last but not least, regulatory gaps, in the meaning of the absence of regulation applicable to innovation and new technological development, for example, storage, renewable hydrogen, etc. So this sandbox must provide the minimum regulatory necessary to carry out this kind of project with legal certainty. So, sorry. Okay, yeah, ready. And what happened after the regulatory sandbox? In our opinion, after this transitional period, the learning achieved with the pilot project must be internalized in the design of a new regulation. We have probably to redefine structures with adequate incentives for innovation in the future, and obviously rethink about the cost and profit of innovation projects, profit sharing schemes, specific remuneration, tax incentives, compensation, wherever. So, in summary, for us, sorry, okay. This is not a chicken and egg problem. Both are the egg and both are the chicken. Both must evolve together. Regulation and innovation must go hand in hand. And I think that all of us believe them deeply. Temporary regulation are needed to foster innovation and the development of new technologies. And at the end, long-term regulation should be adaptive and flexible enough to foster innovation and allow the actual introduction of new technologies. If we really want to achieve the energy transition goals and the European agenda, we think that there isn't another way. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. I think you have been very, very clear with your message. I have some minutes to for some questions you to develop. I would like to take this opportunity. I know you have explained a lot of things, but if you, three of you, had to prioritize one or two actions to be made, which would be these actions? Enrique, for example, I would like to start with you as you finish with a lot of conclusions, but I want you to pick up one or two of them and to develop on that.
Well, I think from this sector is just to make awareness of this need that we have, and to have a common voice towards the public administration to ensure that we can get an effective instrument in the short term that can make this innovation happen, as my colleagues already also said. So I think this is the main action, and the second would be to ensure that once we have the framework, we take advantage of the opportunity and we don't look to another side. So we are aware that the public administration is taking longer than expected, but they are making efforts due to the difficulty to enable these instruments. And I think that the sector should, from our side, from the research development and the companies side, should be at the should be relevant and should be highly effective on taking this opportunity and deliver good projects and lesson learned to ensure the energy transition to be effective in the future.
Thank you, Enrique. Rafa, please, could you elaborate on this? Although I would like you to develop a little bit also on the role of digitalization, because I know you like it.
No, a short message only. Probably digitalization could be affected by that. All the projects need to merge a puzzle, an invisible puzzle that could combine largest and smaller companies, because the property of all the value chain is very complex to introduce. I explain. If you are building a platform for the cities, open data platform, fiber with all the elements, probably you need to combine a small application with the largest company that deploy the fiber infrastructure. Is the message that I could show. Is better to build the future in a collaborative mode that forecast always waiting that appears spontaneously. That is very complex.
Thank you, Rafa. Elena, could you elaborate on one issue? Because later on, and taking advantage of the last comment of Rafa, I would like to ask you one thing.
For me, I'm very totally agree with Rafa. I think for this situation, for this context, collaboration and the open innovation approach is basic to reduce the risk too. And I want to appoint a second idea is that we understand that it's not easy to solve this situation for the administration, but I think that sometimes we have to to look to other sector. And for example, we can have good examples from the financial sector, for example, regarding to sandboxes in the financial sectors and or insurance sectors. They are very regulated sectors too, but they are achieving some advances in this area.
Thank you,
It could
Elena.
help.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Elena. There is one thing I would like you to develop a little bit more on this, because I know, and you have presented some examples on that. And Rafa mentioned before, and Enrique, it's clear because some of the agents of the entities that compose Futureta, the universities and technological centers. And I would like you to explain me in that sense, Elena, how do you work with the partners? And you mentioned a little bit about open innovation, just in a few words. I know that you have
Okay.
presented some examples, but in just a few words. And of course, the other speakers, if they want to develop on, Rafa has already said, you need to collaborate. But if you want to develop on this, please.
Okay, for sure. We have different ways for collaboration. For example, with universities or technological center, we have a special kind of structures that when we put both of part, we put our capacity. For example, a list of main abilities or a list with a list of main goals to achieve in a short period of time, and we sign a kind of contract to work together in a collaborative way, co-developing project. For example, it's just the software integration model. And we can do models from that to the extreme integration, in the sense of we can invest directly through venture capital in technological companies. For example, we have invested in Hestech or in Celeros, or companies regarding with edge computing, for example. And we use another kind of ways of collaboration, like we call it venture builder. Is a kind of path to let the startup start working with the corporation in a very faster way, developing prototypes in less than 3 months and trying them into the company, into the different business areas. So depending of the objective that we have focused, not or from the short period of time to or pretty close to the core business of the corporation, or very moonshot project from the very long time.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if Rafa, would you like to express some words about open innovability in Endesa, that I know that you are developing and you are being very successful in that? And there are some examples here in Andalusia that you have been working with universities also.
I'm very old man, and I have a lot of experience of my past, and I'm not sure to have the receipt, the magical receipt to succeed for future. As you know, I belong to CTA. CTA is an instrument very successful to combine to achieve to financial and public funds. I also know a model, as mentioned Ellen before, I agree totally. The Venture City, all the model of capital participation of the Silicon Valley and the growth based on take part of the unicorns, take parts of some small companies. That is another way. For us in Endesa, we speak about open innovability. It's a merge. Open innovation is a concept that you probably know very well. When you merge innovation with sustainability, appears innovability. It's a merge concept, very complex. The people from Endesa are very crazy. But that means that we offer our surfaces of 200 of data community experience of members, and we push together to work in ensemble around a challenge and hackathon concept and the results are very successful also. And my recent experience in Malaga is I'm vice chair of Innova IRV in terms related with sustainability also. That follow the model of Fraunhofer in Alemania. And that model means that you merge with an university, in that case in Malaga University, Seville University, that has his own foundation to transmit patents, works, and other parts. But in terms of Innova IRV, Instituto Ricardo Valle, we merge at personal members because we are representing ourselves on that foundation, but they are a network of collaborative enterprises and business and small, big, large or not, that appears to catch more part of the public funds that could manage. It's the same model as Technalia. It's the same model. It's a foundation, private, public, without benefits, non-profit objectives. And that means probably collaboration also.
Thank you very much. Enrique, would you like to add anything?
Not anything else. I think it's pretty clear, and we have two very good examples that I also share and know of how collaboration is effective, and of course for regulatory sandboxes. I think that, but in general, in innovation, collaboration has proven as one of the keystones to achieve and succeed. So these are very, very good two examples that also Elena and Rafa shared. So nothing else.
Thank you very much, Enrique. As we are running out of time, I would like to say that there are many issues that we could develop more. I love the topic that you arise, Rafa, regarding convergence of energy and digital sectors. I know we all know that this are very hand-to-hand and is very important. And we have a great opportunity now to work with regarding this. For me, it has been a pleasure, and I would like to thank you, all of you, Enrique, Elena, and Rafa, and I'm always learning from you. I would like to hand over to Joan, who is going to close the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Germán, and thank you the speakers. Thank you, Rafa, Enrique, Elena, for your interesting contributions. Just to finish on time, let me say that all the experiences, the projects that this has been discussed, it's an excellent example of how to allow regulation and innovation go hand by hand. I think that this is the most relevant aspect, and I think that it's a relevant question in order to guarantee the success of the energy transition. Thank you, the assistants, for being with us. And let me finish inviting you to visit the webpage of the project in order to know further details of the report that it has been released today and the different aspects that we are carrying out inside the project. Thank you, and see you in the next activity of Transnet project. Bye.